Okay, we've all heard that. Let's talk about, dispelling some of the stuff. Some of the stuff that we deal with on the calls at times, and some of the questions that we get into the chat room, or whether it's on the Facebook side or wherever, anything we see out on the internet itself, is that, we see people talking about Article 8 in Chapter 7 as if it were a bankruptcy or something, instead of it actually being Section 7, and it's coming from so many different places. What do you guys think about that? Is it something you guys want to try to put together in a call to try to do, where it may make it easier for us as we're trying to do a normal call with a certain amount of news that we want to cover, and then we get sidetracked on rabbit trails at times about, now we've got to go answer another question about Article 8, which we've covered in numerous calls, but now we've got to go back and do that again, or Section 7, which they're calling Chapter 7, and nothing can happen, and we're not there yet. And you guys know what I'm talking about?
Like
Mr. White,
like a call,
RCookie, or
like a call we're doing right now.
Well, kind of like what we're doing right now. Yeah. If we were to do something like that, to where it's just us. We're sitting here and we're kind of hashing out and going over different things about what we want to talk about on the call, number one, but also how do we clean up the call a little bit to where, or better yet, how do we help educate more people out there to understand so they can all get on track maybe and understand and stop getting confused about an Article 8 or a Section 7 or I saw somebody say that Mars and Venus are supposed to align, and that means the RV is going to happen, or our body's going back to the can for the third time today. That must mean we're going to RV today, or whatever. How do we stay on track better?
Hey, Mr. White and Steve, wasn't Section 8, wasn't that what Klinger was trying to get out of the Army with in NASH?
Exactly. See, now you've taken it to a whole new level, because now we're talking about, instead of Section 7 and Article 8, now you're calling it Section 8, which, right. By the way, Klinger had some pretty cool outfits at times.
I don't know, Hutch. I think that's way too much in line with Mr. White last night with the Pointer Sisters stuff.
Thank you for bringing that. Thank you for bringing that up. All of a sudden, on our text, and Tom, I don't know if you're in here with us, on our text, and listen, we're in exciting times. We really are in exciting times. But all of a sudden, Mr. White comes on with a rendition of the Pointer Sisters. Can you sing that for us real quick?
Let's see. I'm so excited. I just can't stand it.
I was wondering how I could post that YouTube on my text.
Well, at the same time, guys, seriously, we are in good time. It's time to let's relax and realize that, we're in a pretty good spot, but some people are still on a roller coaster, and thank you for that, Al. Can I get the rights to that, by the way?
Can we tag this recording, and so I can get with my manager and
royalties?
Yeah. You know what? We should have Tom record this. That
should have been a YouTube with the wig and all the trimmings for it and everything. That would have been.
That's what I'm talking about. Exactly. Tom, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
I thought this was being recorded.
It is being recorded. Huh? Yes, you heard correct.
I wouldn't have done this unless it was being recorded. I don't do anything unless.
So you are recording this then, Tom?
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
I'm so excited.
Good stuff.
Oh, man, here we go.
Yeah. So, in BGG, what do you think about, what I talked about just a minute ago? I said, I would like for us to try to get our calls to where they're, we're always accurate, and these guys. If it's not fact, they're not going to talk about it. You're not going to hear them call it, or anything like that type of thing. But at the same time, we are excited. But, how do you get that point across without sounding like the other internet people?
Well, I would say that I think there's probably room for some dissertation on the difference between 7 and 8 and what they have to do. We can post this recording for people, but listen, there is it's really a tough Dinar updates as a whole, as a group. It's a fine line to walk between being the thought police and being the source of information. We can't tell people what to think. That's very difficult. That's a rough place to be, and there are places that are like that. And there are groups that have fizzled out in a very, very short period of time, or have taken a different life cycle than ours has. And I think there are reasons for that. But I think I had this comment to my daughter the other night, and she was like, I'm way past that. I don't need to listen to that. And I said, listen. I said, the winningest football coach in history, at the beginning of every season, when he taught grown men, professionals, who already knew how to play the game, he would teach them over and over every single year. He would hold up a football, and he'd say, gentlemen, this is a football. And that is exactly how basic he would start his whole year. One of the winningest, Vince Lombardi, one of the best coaches in history. So, that's a pretty good approach, and I took that in my own personal professional teaching and athletics life. That's exactly how I was able to carve out, the living I was for the period of time that I did, because I just kept things very, very constructive, basic, and rather than jump past things that I would assume that people knew, and people hate. There are people who to this day hated going to see me because they knew what I was going to do. I was going to take them backwards about 4 steps, and I was going to drill into them the basics, drill them, so that so in their worst moment of fear, they would only know one thing, and that is exactly the most basic thing. Exactly.
Absolutely. Right. Yep. And Alan's done that, and Alan and RCookie and those guys, we've done that on calls before, where we had one call dedicated to Article 8, one call dedicated to the LOI. But, at the same time, I know we've got new people coming in, that's the thing,
just the constant influx of new people. And you're just, I think there's plenty of room for an Article 8 dissertation.
And let's don't forget RCookie's rendition of Section 8.
Exactly. And then, I'm sure the Pointer Sisters will reappear towards the end of the call.
Exactly.
Yeah, with the band. Get it back together.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You got to get the band back together. That's right. And
but if you only go a certain length into the song, then it's royalty free. So, I would prefer you just don't sing too much of it, because I don't want to be paying every time somebody replays this call.
Oh, man.
Especially for that version.
Yeah, tough crowd here. Tough crowd. But, at any rate, I guess, Tom, you can cut and paste or do whatever you want or whatever with our with the call, and so we can get in. Seriously, guys, we've talked about Article 8. And there's people that saying it's our transition into Article 8. Article 14 is a transitional level, I think, if I understand this right, and hopefully you guys can keep me straight on it too. But 14 is a transition into Article 8, but at the same time we're already in Article 8. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been chastised when we broke Section 5 of Article 8. Is that right?
And Iraq would not have had access to their SDRs.
Thank you.
So, but let's just start off with the most basic. First of all, Iraq has never been bankrupt. And the reason some people have used that term is because some people that did not clearly understand that they were not under IRS Chapter 7 bankruptcy.
Exactly. They're getting all mingled up.
Instead, they were under the UN Charter Chapter 7, which pertains to the United Nations Security Council ability to place sanctions on a country that has had hostile action against another sovereign country. And it was thrown around so much when talking about the sanctions that it was always referred to as they're under Chapter 7. They're under Chapter 7. Well, people in this country, under family law, which is a part of the U.S. Treasury statutes, and Chapter 7 identifies a type of bankruptcy. So they're not the same. What the UN was referring to and what the UN did had nothing to do with bankruptcy law. The UN doesn't even have a bankruptcy law in it, okay? So just dispel this. Iraq has never been bankrupt. And let me take a step further. Let me take it just a step further, because in the translation of some articles of certain people in Parliament referring to a certain financial crises, the translation, the computer used the word bankruptcy. And if you look that up, you get a variety of different meanings of bankruptcy. And what it was referring to was the lack of revenue to meet their budget. So hopefully that will dispel that. So
good point. Good point.
Great job there, Mr. White.
Absolutely great.
Thank you.
Now, there are some things that, we've talked about in time, and I remember saying, Steve, that's a great point to bring up. Guys, help me with that if you can. Be sure to bring that up when we talk the next time with everybody together. What was it, Steve? Where were we going with that?
I don't know. I've slept at least once.
Listen to you. Let's talk about, we've talked about Article 8 in the past in a cause. What about the Article 8 thing? Are we in it? We out of it?
Okay, so you're going to ask that. What is it that we see online so often about Article 8? When they become Article 8, their currency will be international. First of all, their currency is already international. It belongs to a sovereign country by the name of Iraq. It is their currency. So it's already international. Okay? So what is it? What is it that people are preached to and told that certain things will happen when they are Article 8, which is false? Well, what are some of those things?
Well, the one that we see most often is that their currency has to be international for them to go into Article 8.
Which is, that's sort of like the chicken and egg thing there. But they already have. Now get this now. They already have a currency. We know that for a fact. And it is our opinion. It may not be some other people's opinions. And some people don't even have opinion. I'm referring to certain people that consider themselves researchers. It may be their opinion that they are not Article 8, that it is an on-off switch, which is false. It's not. The only off switch is if they are thrown out and they're not even part of the IMF. Otherwise, they strive to be Article 8 because every country is different. Every country is different, just like each individual is different. And I'm going to use a little analogy here. You go into a large hospital. You go into the maternity ward. And you look at all the newborns that were born within the past hour. And each one of those children were not in the womb exactly 9 months to the day. Some were born prior to 9 months. Some were in the womb longer than 9 months. But they were still born. The doctors didn't say, you stay in there. You can't come out.
Send this one back.
Yeah, send this one back. Or, hey, you may think you're not ready to come into this world. It's 9 months. Get your butt out here right now. No.
Right.
Well, all countries are different. Their demographics are different. Their situations are different. Their trade is different. They have issues and challenges that are different from the other one. So they are all striving to to comply with all of the articles of all the requirements of Article 8, but they don't all reach them the same way. That is why the IMF is lenient, and the IMF doesn't say, no. Instead, it's very similar to the consultations that Iraq has got. The IMF says, Iraq, you're not perfect, but you're doing pretty good, and we understand this doesn't comply with the full requirements of Article 8, but we're going to allow you to have these issues because we know you're striving to improve and eventually remove these issues. But and you can go back as many years as you want, and this is a challenge to a certain person out there. You show me where the IMF has said to Iraq, you are not Article 8. But then again, you turn around and also show me, out of 185 countries that are members of the IMF, you show me where the IMF has actually come out and said, you are Article 8. Because they don't. They all are in some way. Some are 9 months, some are born prior to 9 months, and some are longer than 9 months. They're not all the same. Okay, I'll shut up.
The IMF, Iraq was a full member of the IMF for a number of years. They had accepted the obligations of Article 8 well back into Shabibi's time, and nothing has changed other than that they had some that particular Article 5 that they fell out of, and there was an explanation for it that was required, that Iraq was required to put together to the IMF. The IMF accepted that explanation and is working with Iraq to help them correct that particular problem. The only reason that we have this imposed rate on their currency was not a sanction imposed by the IMF. It was part of the sanctions imposed by the United Nations under Chapter 7. And so IMF, through this whole process, is also helping Iraq recover from how many years, decades now, of poor management at the very top levels of their government. The IMF is helping them get back on their feet as they transition from into their new democracy and moving into a market-driven economy along with the rest of the world. And that's the process that we've been monitoring and watching. And because somewhere through that process, the rationale for Chapter 7 by the United Nations goes away. And once
is it Section 7 or Chapter 7?
It's actually Chapter 7 of the United Nations. You can just Google Chapter 7 United Nations, and you can read the entire chapter. It's not very long. I see people tying the Chapter 7, but there's also a Section 7 with the Kuwaiti deal. Is that right?
I think that's interchangeable. I think they throw those chapter and section around interchangeably.
Okay. All right. I apologize, Dave, for cutting.
No, that's okay. I mean, that's what this conversation is really about.
And that's what we do every day. Yeah.
Yeah. So once the United Nations removes Chapter 7, that means they also remove the sanctions that were imposed from Chapter 7, and that releases Iraq to reinstate, revalue, whatever you want to call their currency, but they're going to be working with the IMF to be prepped for that, because I've said this before, you've got a monetary reform process and an economic reform process, and we've had this discussion a number of times, both amongst ourselves and also in our Tuesday evening sessions, where the monetary reform really will, the revaluation of the currency, which is part of the monetary reform, will kickstart the economic reform. That's the trigger mechanism, in our opinion, as to this kickstart. But they've got other things that they have to do for that economic reform to be successful. It's just that we know historically, from an economic point of view, from a monetary point of view, if you don't have a sound economic environment, this level of monetary reform is going to be very difficult to support the valuation. Just look what just happened to Egypt. Egypt depreciated from the dollar, and the Egyptian pound has lost over 50% in a matter of short weeks.
And inflation went through the roof.
Yeah, well, absolutely, and inflation is just running rampant, and the IMF again is helping Egypt deal with this. Iraq has taken the position that we've got to fix both of these problems, and we want our monetary reform to be successful, and for our monetary reform to be successful, our economic reform has got to be successful as well. So
I got you.
Speaking of that, that's all I'm trying to get at.
I got a question if I can break in. There's an article, and I shouldn't say an article. I read it over on one of the sites that recap everything about a particular guy that he says that Iraq is approaching from Chapter 7. In fact, he's quoting, he says, in the case of Iraq out of Chapter 7, it could recover the frozen funds, $50 billion from the DFI account. And that's why Iraq is not worried about their reserves right now, because they know that the day that the UN votes are officially removed from them, Iraq will go get the $50 billion and anything left in the DFI, meaning their reserves could skyrocket to $90 billion in very short order. Any truth to any of that?
Yeah, there is truth in that. The premise of his statement, and there was an article out a couple weeks ago about the United Nations Security Council putting the wraps on the Food for Oil program that dates back all the way back to 2003, 2004. That a certain portion of that money was put into escrow, and it was to be spent on humanitarian issues and basically feeding the public and so forth. Well, that requirement on their oil sales has always been in place. So as the United Nations is drawing down that program, and the article even talked about that they're retaining something like $900,000 because the United Nations had employees in Iraq making sure this food and so forth got to the people.
And that reserve was solely to pay the cost of the United Nations to manage the UN side of that program.
Exactly. And whether it's $50 billion or whatever, how much is left in that fund. I know there's been some talk about this for quite some time. Some different people that remembers this amount of money. I think Tom Larson, TLAR, has kept looking, trying to figure out where that is, and maybe even Robert. And if this is so, a $50 billion windfall to Iraq is quite substantial.
Okay.
Well, the only thing I have with that, you guys, is the fact that in all the years of research, and any time that DFI was ever mentioned, the greatest.
See, I thought it got recovered.
It was, I think, was like 36 billion or something like that. And so I don't know where that 50 billion number is coming from, number one. And number two, I know for a fact that they changed the DFI. That DFI fund was in New York. It was kept in New York.
Right.
And I know I know that ended up morphing into this, I believe it's called like a 300-600 fund. And I know that DFI fund was stripped of, I don't know the exact percentage that they lost of, but I know that thing down almost next to nothing, because we saw literally there was like a 6-month interval there where there were all kinds of reports coming in about the phony project applications for the DFI fund for hospitals, for schools to be built that were just never done, and which is a large reason why you're seeing these ministers getting their butts hauled in front of Parliament now, because their ministries are putting in for some of these development projects that were either phantom, didn't exist, or they did exist, they started them, and they were contracted out to people who never completed them, or it's in a certain percentage completed. So I don't know where that $50 billion number, guys, is coming from. Like where where is he getting that number out of?
See, I'm wondering, is this something that when he brings this out for the whole world to see, this one particular guru guy, when he brings it out, is this something that was it $50 billion 10 years ago, and now that it like you're saying, RC, it's been dwindled down and used for other things? Is he taking something that is old and making something new of it, or is it? I guess it's where I'm sitting here asking, all right, which one? What is it?
I guess we have to see the article that is supposedly stating this. But anyway.
Yeah, because elsewise, Mr. White, you're trying to reverse engineer and say, okay, well, how are you coming by that? Work backwards. And I mean, because like I said, the most, I'm going back through archive articles that talk about the DFI and stuff, and the most I see that in estimates that was at one point at $36 billion, which is, I mean, don't get me wrong, that's a lot of money, and the fact that it was almost stripped down to, like I said before, like almost nothing. So whatever's remaining in there, I'd have to see something that supports the fact that it's a number that's that high, based on the fact of what it was showing as the previous high balance of that account, and then the reports, the fact that it was basically robbed through these bogus projects and so forth over the years, which is why they changed the account to begin with. They changed the whole. I mean, the U.S. Treasury was supposed to oversee, the allocations of this, and I guess for the most part they were. But when, basically when the entire system's that corrupt, where there's. Matter of fact, you would challenge them to find some part of the system that wasn't corrupt, because the contractors are corrupt, the employees within the ministries are corrupt, the people within the banks are corrupt. There's no segment of the entire process or the entire systemically that's not involved in some level in the corruption. So I'm challenging that number, that where that's coming from and the validity of it.
Maybe the U.S. Treasury had to reimburse them the money that they gave away.
So that's my 2 cents in there, Hutch.
All right, cool. Day trader, you around?
Well, yeah. This goes back to, at the beginning, Executive Order 13303, which was really, its sole purpose was the intent to protect the DFI fund from litigation by any outside parties. And I was just trying to figure out here, that executive order has been terminated. There is no longer any protection on the DFI fund.
Thank you.
For litigation, and I was just trying to find out exactly when that was signed. But go ahead.
I saw something about it a few months back that had come out, that where the 13303 part of that had been terminated, like you say, and it's now under a different order or something to that effect. I may be going off on a rabbit.
That's true, and that's just recently.
Okay, good. And, to where, it kind of, like what Robert's saying as well, it's been moved into what he's referring to as the 300, 600, if I understand it right.
Right. And that's why I'm saying I don't know where that number, if that's a manufactured number or whatever. I just don't see the evidence that shows that that's the kind of dollars that they're talking about, given the fact that it was abused.
It sounds as if this one particular guy was taking an article that is old and tying it into something current. It sounds to me.
Right.
Here's another one. Here's some fun stuff, just if you guys don't mind. The CBI will no longer be involved with the auctions. The CBI is handing off the auctions to the banks, as it should be, because of the IBAN system.
I don't know if it's because of the IBAN system, but within
here's the fun part, and this is what I was cackling with you guys and having fun about last night. It goes on and it talks about how no longer will the citizens of Iraq walk into the CBI and exchange their dinar for U.S. dollars.
Okay,
I didn't think you could do that.
Mr. Cult Leader doesn't understand that the individual citizens do not have a window at the central bank. A window means basically you have a position of trade, and only certain banks and money changers, the large companies, have a position at the auctions. So,
like the Federal Reserve.
Exactly, which is you only have a couple banks that deal directly with the Federal Reserve. Exactly.
Right.
But they, but Mr. White, they are transitioning the fact that the auction. Okay, the only way that a private citizen accesses any kind of auction window, to receive U.S. dollars, is in the three instances that they outlined. That they reduced the cap down from 5,000 to 3,000 for individuals that are traveling outside of the country, whether it be because they're students and they're studying abroad, or they're medical patients that are going to get some kind of medical treatment outside of the country, or whether it's just a regular business dealing where it requires you to have money to take with you, usable, that kind of a thing. And they capped it. They brought the cap down from 5 to 3. The news that those auctions and availability for that process to be sort of transitioned from just state-owned banks only into certain private banks is relatively recent news, as well as the fact that we just heard the other day of the fact that the entire system going electronic, within the entire banking sector, within the auction process, and that was more for the corruption and the sort of safeguarding against tracking and data capture and all that kind of stuff. So, but this is just again, I don't know where that it's kind of like what do we call it today? A confluence of things. It's kind of like you're taking 3 and 4 different topics and ruffling them all up, like making a big snowball out of them, and then the new entity that you have starting to talk about. I think there's like little bits and pieces of truthfulness of some things that don't add up to what they're putting out there as a statement.
Clarification to what RCookie was speaking about the exceptions, such as students going abroad or a businessman going abroad or whatever. Still, that student doesn't drive down to the Central Bank of Iraq and walk in the door and say, hey, I got my airplane tickets and my tuition request right here. I'm going to London. Let me have $1,000. No, the student takes that, and this is my understanding from the articles and so forth, the student can take that as a business person would take an invoice to their bank and say, hey,
I need this amount of U.S. dollars. And
right, to their regular Rafidane or Rashid or whatever.
Yes,
right.
Bank of Babylon or whatever. Yeah.
Right, okay.
But anyway, next subject.
Well, and again, we're just sitting here BSing, so to speak. So I mean, I'm just having some fun with some of this stuff that I read, in other places. And I know on the text last night, you guys thought I fell off the wagon, when I was, kind of having some fun. This was just right after Alan's version of the Pointer Sisters. But
I'm so excited.
I
and
knew it
basically,
was coming. I just knew it was coming later in the call.
I know something I wanted to ask you guys. Well, if
BGG's working on the royalties. Yeah.
counting the money.
Yeah, exactly.
Here's one. There was an article that we talked about on the Tuesday call, but more of it's come up today about the bank in I think it was Rashid in Diyala. About and the article first talks about the liquidity crisis that you hear about permeating the entire Iraqi culture, but relative to that, they're talking about the fact that this liquidity crisis has been in existence for 2 years, and they even mention within the text of the article talking about how citizens in that area have been forced to go to other banks outside of where they live there and cash their salary checks because of the lack of hard currency within their marketplace there. So what did you guys make of that? I know there's some insinuations going out there that means that there's got to be that has to be LDs and so forth. What's your guys' take on that end?
I'm going to save my comedy. You guys go ahead.
I think there's a strong possibility of that being a transfer of funds to the bank for the electronic deposit of salaries.
Okay.
That's one possibility.
But do you think, Day, do you think that's in 3-0 notes, or do you think that's in the...
They're not going to reintroduce 3-0 notes. They've worked too hard for too long to pull those off the street. And so I can see how the leap was made to the lower denominations. But what purpose would that serve without a change in value? I mean, if it took a wagon load of Dinar to go to the grocery store, now it's going to take 4.
Right. So even though we know that for a fact that those 3 ministries started on the second distributing their salaries, right, via electronically, and the fact that these folks, when they were prior to that happening, these folks in this area for the last 2 years, when they're getting their biweekly or however they're paid, salaries, they go to the banks. They can't go to the banks because the banks didn't have the hard currency notes to pay them out in, so they're forced to go elsewhere. And we know that this electronic thing was launched on the second, at least in those 3 ministries, and plans for the other ones to follow. So that being said, I mean, I agree with that, Day, as far, that's what my initial thing was, is thinking that why would they work their tails off like they have for the last, however many years that this phase of the Delete the Zeros project and the Reducing the Note Count's been going on, only to infuse more money back into the money supply. But Mr. White, we were all chewing this around beforehand. We were thinking that, and again, we're not suggesting that this is newly minted, newly printed currency getting back into the market, but rather a reallocation or a reassignment of the overall money supply, given the whatever priority those regions are suffering from.
That's where I'm at with that. That's where I'm at with it, Robert. Just like in this country, banks buy notes from the Federal Reserve via different Federal Reserve branches.
They buy the money, right?
They buy the money, and it is shifted, allocated, as you're saying, Robert, back and forth as to where they forecast it's going to be needed. I see the CBI doing something very similar, except there's a new twist in this. That's what Day Trader brought up. The electronic banking changes the dynamics some.
There is no way that these ministries can say that okay, your salary is now going to be electronic deposit into a bank account without having addressed the assignment and identification process for the debit cards.
Yeah, because they're still going to take the debit card, and they're still going to need some cash. They may not have to live entirely off of.
So what we were talking about, you guys, prior to getting together here formally, what we were talking about was, the fact that with those 3-0 notes, I mean, obviously, it's going to take some time. Mr. White, you were making some comments about, the amount of time it's going to take for, that greater increased purchasing power hitting the citizen, like getting to the citizen level, getting to the point of purchase level, where then the currency, that valuation would then, kick in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's just that's the cycle of inventory and the clearance of inventory at the old prices. I mean, if you ordered something right now, if you're an importer, if your business imports something and sells it today, you're paying a higher price because it's costing you $11.80 something per dollar to purchase that. After the revaluation, now you have an increased purchasing power, but you could be sitting there with, depending upon what the product is, maybe a 6-week inventory of product that you've paid 1,180 some dinar per dollar, and you've got to be able to move that product without losing money, and so you're not going to. I don't think you're going to see an instantaneous drop in the prices on the streets. This is going to have to on the next order cycle on your inventory, you're going to pay a different rate, and we don't know if they're going to, for lack of a better term, dollar cost average down in their retail pricing to reflect the bottom line cost of their inventory. We don't know what that process is, but it's not going to be the next day.
Right. I can't agree with you. I agree with you more with that, because it cannot be a light switch on, light switch off. Okay, you went from X amount and have it be 15 times less the next day kind of a thing. It's just not. I totally agree with that.
I think you'll see the perishables come down rather quickly. Because you can't have a big inventory of those products,
right.
but hard materials, hard products, depending upon how large your business is and what your inventory turnover rate is, who knows how. Since we don't know the timing and the Iraqi people don't know the timing, these shop owners, they still have to run their business, and so their orders are going to have to flow as they're meeting the supply demand for their customers.
Right. So what we're talking about here is more or less a gradual integration of the new pricing policy, so that it doesn't just have such a hot cold impact on the market.
Right. But at the same time, somebody's going to take a hit at some point, and we've talked about this some in the past too. If the guy, let's take, for example, Rodney Dangerfield, when he was in back to school, and they had a company called in Fantasyland, and they had widgets, right? And so let's take that for a second and say, all right, so this guy just got in a big load of, I don't know, tape recorders, for example, okay? And just like Day Trader just said, if it's perishable, it's going to move pretty quick. But at some point, there's going to be a point to where it's a switch over, so to speak, I think. But the guy that's got the tape recorders, if he didn't get rid of all of them through this slow process, he's going to take a hit. How does he recover his lost profit? Is there going to be some help from,
we don't know
the government?
We don't know at this point, but remember this too. He's probably not the only one selling tape recorders.
Exactly. So now it's a free for all, and everybody's dumping.
So the guy who just was getting ready to order a replenishment of his inventory of those tape recorders, and the revaluation of their currency hits, he now has the advantage over his competitors, in that his new shipment is at the new price, and now he can post that price. And now his competitors are going to have to make a decision about how they are going to handle their own inventory.
That's my point. They've got to take a hit because he bought large, and he bought it at the old price. This thing comes along, and the guys now who have bought at the, it's no different than if you get a price increase from a manufacturer, so to speak, okay? Because the guy bought large at that point, he's sitting on this, and so the guy who just bought, he's going to take a hit for a period of time until these other guys clean out their inventory. Is that right? Am I thinking right?
Well, that's the way I'm seeing it. What we're speculating on how this could possibly roll out. The real question, and we kind of went down another rabbit hole there, but
I know. Well, that's what we do. Yeah.
What's new, right?
What's new? Right.
But remember, too, that once the revaluation takes place, we will see the lower denoms surface when the CBI has determined that there's a need for them in the marketplace because of the pricing of the goods. And if something costs less than 50 dinars in the marketplace, I can also see them using their debit card for those smaller purchases rather than having to worry about carrying a lot of smaller denominations that actually aren't even in the economy at that point.
The CBI will forecast. They'll have a forecast, a guesstimate, as to when those other notes are going to be needed. And let me give you just, for those that are going to listen to this later, I was involved a few years ago.
I don't know if Tom's going to let it loose first, at this point. I don't know if he should.
I was involved in shipping product via container, via shipment from the United States to China as well as Turkey. And we were having, on the way out, to forecast 6 to 8 weeks out the final sale of that product. Now, reversing that, you imagine that you're a distributor or business owner in your country, in this case, Iraq, and you have product on the shelf at a certain price. You have product en route to you at a certain price, and now you start buying at a much higher value currency, and what you're buying is costing you so much less. But now think about it. You're on the phone or on the computer or whatever, and you're wiring the money to the guy that you're buying rice from in Vietnam or sugar off the north coast of Australia or whatever. And you're just now buying it. The thing still, unless he has it in the warehouse, he still has to harvest it or process it. But let's say he has it in the warehouse. He still has to secure a container, load the container, ship the container to the port, wait on the ship. It isn't like the ship is sitting there waiting on the container.
Right.
The ship that's there may not even be going to the Persian Gulf. It may be going somewhere else. Get it on the ship, and if it's going directly to the Persian Gulf, that's still several weeks out. So that's stuff that you as a business person has bought at a much less cost isn't going to even get to you for 4, 5, 6 weeks. So that's what I mean about the lower cost percolating into the economy. And you multiply that hundreds and thousands of times over, whether it's sugar or rice or whatever. It could be widgets to your Toyota that's coming out of Japan or to the Hyundai coming out of Korea. So
Yeah, I hit an IED the other day, and now I need a new ball joint, or something
there you
like
go.
that. Yeah. Okay, and it didn't mean to get off on a rabbit trail, and I apologize. I noticed the RC has gotten quiet on us.
No, not at all. I mean, listening to
the banner.
this is good stuff here. So.
Well, and it's fun stuff. At the same time, it's kind of how we talk as we talk and visit. All right, I got one more for you guys, and then I saw the email out about the METAC thing. Let's talk about that in a minute, but I keep seeing this HCL thing come up.
I just don't understand what the big issue is. I mean, housing closing loans, I can't figure out where that comes into play here.
Well, it's a new market, right?
That's good.
I've given my opinion on this before.
Yeah.
Guys, we saw articles that some of the ministers of Parliament believe that they've resolved a lot of the HCL issues, and they're putting a law together that they believe can pass Parliament. That means that if that's the case, that means that they have got to have a workaround for Article 140, which is massive, because and we talked about that well, not just last night or the other night in our Tuesday call, but many times before. Article 140 is an incredibly contentious issue that has to do with boundaries and demographics in some of these contested areas that goes back to Saddam Hussein, and so they're going to have that, some kind of a workaround for Article 140. In addition to that, they've got to have a census, because they need to know how many people are going to be participating, because part of what the HCL addresses is the compensation that the Iraqi people as individuals are going to receive for the resources that are sold in their country, because the Constitution says that they own those resources. And
Day, where are they going to mail the check to?
Well,
right.
And part of that too, Robert, is also the funding that goes to the provinces for their general budget as well. But that's based on the population density in that province. Well, for crying out loud, how are you going to be able to calculate that with the number of displaced people that they have? Some of those people are going to go home, and some of them are never going to go back to that province.
Right. How do you do that in Mosul when you say, just like what RC just said, where, mail the check here to 142 Oak Street, Mosul, and then boom. Well, can I fill out a change of address form?
Yeah.
And the bottom line is, what does this have to do with the change in the value of the currency? Nothing.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
It's a revenue. It's an internal, social revenue issue.
Now, tell BGG to hit that sound effects, that shiny new sound effects button.
Got to get that sound effects. You know what? We really do. Well, we need to get him to get us one for the calls, and I know that Pat and Bobby and those guys would probably enjoy it too when they do their calls.
Get me the Pointer Sisters.
And then, we've got to have the Pointer Sisters. I keep forgetting. But I tell you, I did see that in the chat room this morning, RC brought in the deal about the METAC workshop. That's pretty exciting stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I can tell you guys this, and over the years that to watch how this program has morphed. I mean, you talk about Iraq changing, and Iraq's not it's obvious that Iraq isn't the only country that's in this. We know what Egypt's going through. We know what Jordan's going through. Saudi Arabia. I mean, everybody in this region is sort of more or less in the same boat, and it's obvious that the curriculum for these METAC workshops that were run through the IMF previously have morphed in, every year, have just gotten bigger and more detailed and more, and more involved. And it's amazing because the other day I put into the chat room I've been kind of waiting for this 2017 course schedule to come out for the METAC workshops, and I finally got it. And just posted the one day, just the January 2017 the course schedule. And part of the points that we've tried to make in our calls week to week is that, first of all, anybody telling you that the news isn't important is completely, clueless. And this more or less points it out, demonstrates that fact more than, completely clearly, is the fact that read the synopsis of these courses and the description and what it involves and so forth. And I defy anybody to just we'll just take an arbitrary snapshot right here of 60 days. Look at the news in the last 60 days, and I defy anybody to look at that course description schedule and tell me where you haven't read something or heard us talk about something that's current news that's relative to this schedule that they're of courses and curriculum that they're scheduled to go through in January.
Things that they're preparing for, right?
Every single one of those things is something. And the one in general, guys, and I'll let you guys go off on this one right here, is the fact of, you saw that one course in there that talks about real estate appraisal, real estate valuation, and that kind of a thing?
Now, that was one of the latter ones.
Right.
That we just saw.
Right. And that's, you think about the news this week. How they said they're going to need how many homes for?
2 million.
2 million homes. And how many stories have we read about the various projects being sponsored by the GOI relative to, and the banking sector relative to parcels of land that are going to be donated or given to martyrs, soldiers that have died in the ISIS war, their families, the soldiers when they're returning home, the programs to get them these parcels of land and then special financing to build homes and so forth on them. Is it a coincidence that you see curriculum like this where in their past as a country they've never had to evaluate their property to an open market economy? Have they?
No.
Home closing loans.
Oh, that was perfect. Home closing loans. Oh, maybe that's the ACL that we're talking about. Maybe we're just reading it all wrong.
Yeah, maybe so.
Well, Robert, the METAC programs is not just one thing. I mean, they are addressing every aspect of economic development. I mean, we've seen programs on anti-corruption, anti-money laundering. We've seen tons of different programs on financing and banking. We have seen programs on this one with the real estate. These are all issues. And by the way, this isn't just Iraq. I mean, this is really directed at the MENA territories, the Middle East, North African territories, those countries that send groups to these programs to not only interact with their peers from all of these other countries and help identify best practices, but also identify areas that are problematic and what successful solutions have been that have surfaced, and those get shared in these programs. I think it's really amazing because this is going to help Iraq and all of these other countries as well further develop their economies so that they are successful, and I think that is the end goal of what the METAC program is all about.
Yeah, and let me throw these at you guys, because for the ones who didn't see it when I posted in there, tell me if you think these are relevant to what Dave was just outlining. Strengthening integrity and anti-corruption capacities. almost verbatim what Dave was just talking about relative to the anti-corruption things. The one I just spoke of, residential property price indices, current issues in tax law design relevant for the Middle East. When you're seeing the IMF ask them to restructure their entire tax base, their entire tax situation, and here the IMF's not just asking them to perform in this area, they're actually outlining a strategic game plan to go about addressing and rewriting their landscape towards these areas.
It's like one arm of the IMF, Robert, is saying this is what you need to do, and then the other arm is saying this is how you do it.
Exactly. Great, well put. Well spoken. Here's another one, Dave, for the same thing. Framework for the management of fiscal risks. Do you remember in the LOI asking specifically for risk management and capital adequacy ratios and all that kind of stuff? Well, same kind of thing. Here they're outlining one arm telling them, hey, listen, we'd like you to do this, and here's how you're going to go about doing it. You're not alone. We're going to hold your hand right through this.
And remember, for the monetary reform to be successful, the economic reform has to be successful.
Right.
And if Iraq was not going to re-engage into the world, especially on the financial side of the house, would there be any need for any of this?
Well, and that was the comment that Steve made earlier, that a lot of this stuff that they're preparing for is post.
Mm-hmm. Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we'll be reading about this in the Wall Street Journal, sitting somewhere.
About 2 years afterwards, too. This is an ongoing process. It's not going to stop.
Yep. And guys, before we move on or finish up here or move on, in going through, because I just posted in the chat room that day just the January course schedule, and then in perusing through, because like I said, I just finally got it, the 2017 version, and I started looking ahead, and lo and behold, this is the name of their course that they're doing the last week in March. It's actually March 27 through April 7, and it's titled Monetary Policy. And you're going to have to go in and put it in the chat room again to read both the course description, the qualification of the participants of this of this particular course, and the objectives of the course. But just to speak to Dave's point just then about where monetary reform falls into the chronology of all this is just amazing stuff.
Guys,
it's time for you to sing your song, Alan.
Well, I got real quick before we get out of here, Mr. White, and you close us out with your song. Dave, this is for you. Did you see these things here today about the commercial agencies law going through?
Now that one got me ready to sing because
a duet.
That's a big one for me because it has to do with how companies outside Iraq come into Iraq and start a new company. There's all this discussion about looking for international investment coming in to build these Iraqi companies, but there are going to be international companies that want to come in and start a branch of their company in Iraq. And that commercial agencies law is the one that determines all the rules and requirements for them to be able to do that. And the existing law is so prohibitive that no company would even consider coming into Iraq under those terms. And so they've had to rewrite this law. And I think this is going to be another opportunity for a huge influx. Just look at some of the major hotel chains. They're not going to come in and basically give that business to someone who lives in Iraq just because that's the way the law reads. They get nothing out of it.
And for you scorekeepers out there that have your checklist ready, by the way, that commercial agencies law was one of the 8 laws that we outlined. What was it, like 4 calls ago, relevant to the financial and economic laws that we were waiting on. Anywhere else,
we got to see if. I don't know if BGG is going to record this or not, or put this in. But yeah, I agree with what you're saying.
Well, one more real quick thing here, guys, and Day and Mr. White and Hutch and Tom. Here's the last one. We also got one out today over and above the commercial agencies law. The call for the vote on the consumer protection law.
To me, that's a biggie.
Oh, absolutely.
And Day, for the exact reasons that you just outlined, that the commercial agencies law is important, because there's no way companies are going to come in here without those consumer. You've got product protection laws, you've got consumer protection laws that are just they're necessary evils in a private sector economy.
And that's just to prevent opportunists from taking advantage of the consumer, or opportunists taking advantage of the Iraqi manufacturing industry and bringing in terribly inferior products.
Right. It keeps it where it's they're going to push their made in Iraq first, I think, and instead of the guy who's trying to sell the Smoochie bags on the street corner or whatever, instead of Gucci bags, it kind of protects them from a lot of that kind of stuff as well, if I understand it right.
Yes.
Right. Yep. And think about that relative to the article we saw the other day about, online, e-commerce, $40 billion potential for 2020, and the fact that, it's thriving in spite of a failed banking system to support it, because obviously, without plastic and without the electronic, which is, now just getting into the marketplace, these folks can't capitalize on the full Monty, electronic experience, right? But, and the fact that in spite of that, this is an industry that's thriving now, and they outlined the potential for it in the future. I just think that's some amazing stuff coming up here.
Well, that's stuff that we want to talk about on our next call next Tuesday night, and so I'm kind of making notes so we can kind of start preparing for that kind of stuff. What I'm trying to figure out right now is and I know BGG's just been sitting in the background probably laughing at us again, but as he usually does. But we've got to figure out how to get Alan's rendition of the Pointer Sisters involved more.
Okay. Well, we can do any type, like, I'm so excited and I just can't hide it. I'm about to lose control and I think I like it. I'm so excited and I just can't hide it. And I know, I want it.
Exactly. But that's the thing behind it, I think, in this last call.
I'm going to tell you, he was going along good there, and it just took a turn right at the end. I mean, he was on it, and it just went a really dark place.
It did. We'll have to get him to work on the lyrics a little bit for us.
Yeah.
But at the same time, and BGG, you know it too, and because you sit in on a lot of these things with us all the time. I mean, dang, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about in the news now is a lot of it things that will happen after this occurs. It seems, like what Day Trader and RC were talking about earlier, and so we're in a good spot.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was going to mention earlier, as everybody was talking on a bigger picture about economic impact and market impact, pricing impact. But the real impact is this. The reason that here's the reason they're coming out and talking about this so publicly. And Alan and I have had these conversations before. I've even talked about it, some recently. Is I don't know that I'm completely in on who's going to get taken and who's not behind the scenes based on their whatever they paid. I think the one thing, and I was actually even talking to my dad about this, one reason that they're coming out and talking about this publicly is because what they don't want to happen is in the event of some radical upward value change, they don't want some poor cuss, some Iraqi going to the store and, buying a loaf of bread that cost him $10,000, and that'll listen,
right.
And it was not going to be. That is not going to be a singular occurrence. I mean, there are going to be a lot of people. Think about some of the questions that people ask regularly, daily over here. Now go over there and imagine how many people are going to go to the store and fork over a 10,000 dinar note for something and just not even. And if you don't think there's going to be opportunity for opportunism, that's going to be a very, very
no doubt about it.
And listen, regarding the fact that they've got to keep this some big secret because the whales will swoop in and buy up the country for pennies on the dollar, no, they're not. They simply are not. It's not going to happen that way. First of all of the dinar, if you stop and think about this, all of the dinar, whatever that number is, and I'm not even offering the argument as to what the number is. I'm saying they know what the number is. They're not afraid of it. They really don't care. They don't care who owns that. It could be me, you, Hutch, Mr. White, or Robert, who has it all in his basement. All of it. Right. They're not going to care who has it because it's external to the country, and that's a fixed number as far as they're concerned.
Right.
So the premise that they're going to keep it some big secret towards the end is probably a flawed way to look at this. I think
somebody somewhere is going to pay 2 million dinar for a early model Camaro.
I knew it was coming. I just knew it. Just knew that's where he was going. When he started in with a 2 million, I thought, oh man, come on, it's got to be like that. Can we go back to the Pointer Sisters? Can somebody sing a song?
They're on break.
Yeah, everybody's on break. They're in the green room. Yeah,
we're here all week.
That's right. Hey, but you know what? When I'm done with it, it will run like a $2 million Camaro.
Hey, I'm good with that.
I'm not backing up. I'm not ashamed of my purchase.
I just want to go for a ride. That's all.
I did let it out of the bag what that was all about, wasn't it?
Kind of.
Yeah.
But at any rate, it's all in fun. Well, dang. It just. Let's get together. I guess what's in the next day or two and try to start pinning down, figure out where we want to go news-wise, and let's see what comes up in the next day or so. So we're ready for our news call, and kind of go from there.
Sounds good.
That works for me. This is a recorded call, so.
Well, we're gonna leave that up to you. I don't know if people want to actually hear all of our ranting and.
I'm sure they're going to like it. Okay, here it is. We're going to push the button. Thanks everybody for tuning in to these Hanyaks this time. There it is. He's singing again. I'm not even going to sign it off like that. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We appreciate it. Because I can't, with a straight face, I can't say Dinar commentary, Dinar news, when Alan was singing all that time. I can't even do it. Adios, everybody. Have a great